Control decks in Commander usually don't work. They are way too slow and it's nearly impossible to keep up with 3 opponents at once. But with this Commander, I finally cracked the code. A true control deck that actually thrives in multiplayer. Ephara, God of the Polis. Or as one of my Discord members keeps calling her, God of the Police. And honestly, in this deck she kind of is. She watches everything, she punishes misplays, and she makes sure no one gets out of line. Ephara is a 4 mana indestructible enchantment creature and probably one of the most underrated value engines in the format. At the beginning of each upkeep, not just ours, Ephara will check if a creature entered the battlefield under our control the previous turn. If it did, we get to draw a card. Now that might sound pretty lackluster until you realize that's up to 4 extra cards every turn cycle, without even having to attack or spend any extra mana. Just play a creature or create a token every single turn and Ephara will generate you an insane amount of card draw. Ephara isn't always a creature, she only becomes a creature once your devotion to white and blue hits a total of 7, meaning you will need a total of 5 blue and white mana pips on permanents you control in addition to Ephara, since she already has 1 blue and 1 white mana pip in her own mana cost. But honestly, that part rarely matters most of the time. Later in the game, you can turn her into a creature and use her as a huge indestructible beatstick to swing with at your opponents. But she's mainly here to act as a value engine and draw us a ton of cards. On top of that, whether she is a creature or an enchantment, she will always have the indestructible keyword, making her really annoying for your opponents to deal with. She'll survive most removal, she'll survive board wipes, and she will survive creature combat. In a nutshell, Ephara is a hard to remove draw engine, the perfect centerpiece for a control deck. Ephara can be built in many different ways. Blink, stax, combo, I've even saw some token decks with her, but I decided to go with something way more ambitious and something I've never done before on this channel. A true reactive control deck. I am fully aware of the fact that control decks are doomed to fail in the Commander format. You've got 3 opponents and 3 boards to deal with, and it's really easy to get outpaced and run out of answers. But with Ephara as a Commander, we will never run out of options because she will draw us a million cards and we will never run out of cards in our hand. Since Ephara cares about whether a creature entered the battlefield last turn, I've built this deck with a ton of flash creatures, instant speed token generators, and ways to cheat creatures into play during an opponent's turn. Creatures with flash are especially valuable in this deck. They allow us to keep our mana open for counter magic, and they allow us to play a creature during an opponent's turn and giving us an extra card with Ephara. Being a blink deck, we do have access to some really easy to pull off 2-card infinite combos, but I decided to exclude all of those. Instead, I decided to build a control version out of this deck that wins the game by outvaluing and outgrinding your opponents. And I'll be honest, this was a really tough deck to build. It's the first true control deck I've ever built and I lost a lot of sleep over tuning this deck. But I'm really happy with how the final list turned out. If you've ever wanted to play a control deck that actually feels fun and really strong in multiplayer games, I think you're going to love this one. As per usual, I will be going over every single card in the deck and I will be explaining why I decided to include it. This video is divided up in 7 categories. The ETB Creatures, the Blink package, the value cards, acceleration, interaction and control, the lands, and a considering section. Let's get started by talking about the ETB creatures. These are the creatures we want to be blinking, bouncing, and replaying every chance we get. Each of them bring a powerful effect whenever they hit the battlefield, be it removal, card draw, disruption. They are the absolute backbone of this deck. Snapcaster Mage, one of my personal favorite flash creatures ever printed. It's a 2-mana 2/1 creature with flash, and whenever it enters the battlefield, it will give 1 instant or sorcery card in our graveyard flashback until the end of turn. This means we can recast any instant or sorcery card from our graveyard by just paying the mana cost, giving us a second use on the card. Since we are a control deck, we do play a ton of instant and sorcery cards, be it removal spells, bounce spells, counter spells, board wipes. Even if you don't have any counter magic in your hand and an opponent is playing a game-ending spell, just flash in a Snapcaster Mage, recast the counter spell from your graveyard, and you can still counter that spell. Snapcaster Mage really is a fantastic card for any sort of control deck. Knight of the White Orchid, a 2-mana 2/2 first strike creature that whenever it enters the battlefield checks if any opponent controls more lands than we do. When they do, we get to search our library for a basic plains card and put it onto the battlefield. Since we are in Azorius colors, we don't have any good ways in this deck to accelerate our mana by ramping our lands. So if you are playing in a pot with a lot of green players and they play a Kodama's Reach, a Farseek, whatever to accelerate their mana by getting a land into play, we will always control the least amount of lands on the table. Thanks to this creature's ability, we will then get a way to accelerate our mana and actually ramp. If you're not the starting player in your game, you will automatically be behind one land drop. Knight of the White Orchid will then guarantee you at least one trigger, and as you will see later in this video, we do play a ton of ways to blink this creature, making it leave the battlefield, then enter the battlefield, and every time it does, it will check the lands of your opponents, and if you control less lands, you will be able to accelerate your mana. White Mane Lion, a 2-mana 2/2 creature with flash, and whenever it enters the battlefield, we have to return one creature we control back to our hand. I know, this card seems absolutely horrible, but it probably is one of the strongest cards in the entire deck. First up, it's a really low cost creature with flash, meaning we can just flash it in during an opponent's turn when we have Ephara on the field and we will get an extra Ephara trigger. Secondly, we can use this ETB effect to return any of the other ETB creatures we have in this deck from the battlefield to our hand, and we can then recast it again and we will get another use of the ETB trigger. Bouncing a creature we control back to our hand to replay it on a later turn is worse than blinking the creature, but in some scenarios this might prove to be really useful. You can, for example, just target the Snapcaster Mage you just played, it will go back to your hand and you will be able to use it again later. And the third reason why we play this card in the deck, and probably the best reason, is that this card lets us bounce any creature we control, even itself. If you do have the mana to do so, you can just play this creature at the end of opponent 1's turn, it enters, bounces itself, and you will get an Ephara trigger. You can then do the same again during opponent 2 and opponent 3's turns, and this card will basically guarantee you that for 2 mana you can get an Ephara trigger every single turn. As long as you have Ephara on the field, this card basically reads 2 mana, draw a card. If you are about to build an Ephara deck, this is the first card you should include in the deck. It's just that good. Aether Channeler, a 3 mana wizard that whenever it enters the battlefield allows you to choose one of 3 fantastic options. The first option allows us to create a 1/1 bird token. You can use this card and blink it to generate an army of bird tokens to just swing with at your opponents and use as a win con, or you can use these bird tokens as chum blockers to actually protect yourself. The second option can be used to bounce any non-land permanent on the battlefield. You can both use this to deal with any problematic permanents on the battlefield and just bounce them back to your opponent's hands, or you can use this to even return your own ETB creatures to your hand so you can get a second use out of them later. And the third option allows us to draw a card. Even in an Ephara deck where you will be drawing like 7 gazillion cards every single turn, additional card draw is always really good. Honestly, all of the options on this card are absolutely fantastic and you will always find a use for him. But the best part about this card is that you can just pick the option you need at the given time. And that's what makes Magic cards go from good to great, if they give you options and versatility. Aven Interrupter, a 3 mana 2/2 creature with flying and flash. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to exile target spell that's still on the stack. Then that spell becomes plotted, meaning the owner of that spell may cast a spell on a later turn on sorcery speed by just paying its mana cost. Essentially, this creature functions as somewhat of a counter spell on a creature body with flash. If someone is playing their Dragon, for example, you can just flash this in, exile the Dragon as a spell, it will never enter the battlefield and the owner will have it become plotted. That ability in itself is already really good because you can just some sort of delay any spell that's being cast. On top of that, this card even has another passive ability. Spells our opponents cast from graveyards or exile cost 2 generic mana more to cast, and this just interacts perfectly with the first ability. If someone casts a spell, you use this creature and the spell becomes plotted. They can't cast a plotted spell for free anymore. Now they will have to pay 2 additional mana for it. And nowadays in modern day Magic, a ton of decks rely on playing cards either from exile or from their graveyard. If you're playing against a Spellslinger deck that wants to flashback their entire graveyard by using a Past in Flames, now they will have to pay an extra 2 generic mana for every spell they decide to flashback. If you are playing versus a Sephiroth deck and they want to set up an infinite loop by just recasting a Gravecrawler for 1 mana from their graveyard, now they will have to pay 2 generic mana for every time they do so, just shutting their infinite combo down. And it is a one-sided effect. It's only for opponents, so we can still use a Snapcaster Mage, for example, to flashback anything in our graveyard and we don't have to pay any extra mana cost for that. Fear of Imposters. For just 3 mana, you get a 3/2 enchantment creature body that whenever it enters the battlefield allows you to counter target spell. The controller of that spell does get to manifest Dread, meaning they get to look at the top 2 cards of their library, pick one of them, put it in the graveyard, and the other one gets put onto the battlefield as a 2/2 creature face down. If the face down card is a creature, the owner can turn it face up at any time by paying its mana cost. Honestly, countering a game-ending spell and just allowing them to manifest Dread once will always be totally worth it. And at this point, you're probably getting the gist of how this deck works. If an opponent in their turn is casting a spell we don't like, we just use any of these flash counter creatures, counter that spell, a creature enter the battlefield during an opponent's turn, and we do get to draw a card of Ephara, both disrupting our opponent's game plan, giving us a creature body, and allowing us to refill our hand and keep the answers coming. Glasspool Mimic, a 3 mana clone creature. And whenever we cast this creature, we can let it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature we control. We basically play this card to just double up on the value of any ETB creatures we already play in the deck. Let's say, for example, you already have a Snapcaster Mage on the battlefield. You can just play your Glasspool Mimic. It will enter as a copy of Snapcaster Mage and you will get another use out of Snapcaster Mage's ability. And honestly, there's no real downside to including a card like this in the deck because it is an MDFC card, meaning you can also play the backside of this card, which is a land that taps for 1 blue mana and enters the battlefield tapped. So if you don't need the clone effect, this just functions as a land card in this deck. Recruiter of the Guard, a 3 mana 1/1 creature that whenever it enters the battlefield allows us to search our deck for any creature with toughness 2 or less and put it directly into our hand. In this deck, almost all creatures have lower than 2 toughness. So whenever you play this card, you can just go search your library for any creature you need at the given board state, put it directly into your hand, and if you do have the mana for it, you can instantly play it. You need some mana acceleration? Just go get a Solemn Simulacrum. You want to start blinking your creatures, but you don't have a blink spell? Just go tutor up a Spell Seeker and then use that to tutor up a Cloud Shift. You really want a clone effect? Just go tutor up a Glasspool Mimic. You want to set up some insane card draw with Ephara later in the game? Just use this card to go tutor up your White Mane Lion. You really need some removal for a creature on the board? Just use this to go tutor up a Solitude. Honestly, the value this creature brings to the table is just insane in this deck. Especially if you can start blinking this creature later in the game. You can basically tutor any creature out of your deck straight to your hand. Skyclave Apparition, a 3 mana 2/2 spirit. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls with mana value 4 or less. Whenever this creature leaves the battlefield, that opponent will get an XX illusion token, X being equal to the mana cost of the card we exiled. This creature basically is removal on a stick. An opponent controls their commander, an aura shards, or heuristic studies, just play a Skyclave Apparition and the card is exiled forever. This card is pretty similar to a card like Oblivion Ring, but even better, because when this creature would leave the battlefield, the opponent doesn't get their permanent back, they just get a useless illusion token instead. So they are never ever getting their valuable card back. Later in the game, if you are able to blink this creature, you can get some insane value out of this. Spellseeker, a 3 mana 1/1 creature that is, once again, like Recruiter of the Guard, a tutor on a stick. This time it will search your deck for any instant or sorcery card with mana value 2 or less. And obviously, as we are a control deck, we do play a lot of cheap instants and sorceries that you can just go fetch up with Spellseeker. You're behind on the board and you really need a board wipe? Just use a Spellseeker to go get your Final Showdown or your White Sun's Twilight. An opponent is about to cast a huge spell that will end the game, just use a Spellseeker to go get a mana drain. An opponent just made their commander indestructible by equipping a Darksteel plate to it, Just use a Spellseeker, get a Swords to Plowshares, and you can deal with the problem. Or if you do have a really valuable ETB creature on the battlefield, you can just play a Spellseeker, go fetch your Cloud Shift, your Ephemerate, and you can start blinking it. If you are able to blink a Spellseeker, the amount of spells you are able to get from your deck straight into your hand is absolutely crazy. Stonecloaker, a 3 mana 3/2 flash flying creature, and you can basically compare this card to a more expensive version as White Mane Lion. Another creature you can play on instant speed, and whenever it enters a battlefield you have to bounce a creature you control. And you can, like with White Mane Lion, bounce this creature itself and you can cast it during each player's turn to get a ton of Ephara triggers. On top of that, it does have a bonus effect. Whenever this card enters a battlefield, we get to exile one card from any graveyard. Nowadays in modern day Magic, a ton of decks rely on using their graveyard, be it a classic Reanimator deck that is about to reanimate their Elesh Norn, a Necrobloom deck that is about to recast a Field of the Dead from their graveyard, or even Spellslinger decks that rely on infinite combos by using flashback cards from their graveyard. Stonecloaker can really help you deal with the problem because you can just exile any targets those decks might have from the graveyard. Nowadays, playing Graveyard Hate is a must and it will win you games. Tishana's Tidebinder, 3 mana 3/2 Merfolk with Flash. Whenever this creature enters a battlefield, we get to counter up to one triggered or activated ability. If an ability of an artifact creature or planeswalker is countered this way, that permanent will lose all abilities for as long as we control Tishana's Tidebinder. This effect might seem really weird, but it does have a ton of uses in a game of Magic. Someone is about to go infinite with a Kiki-Jiki and a Zealous Conscripts, you can just flash in a Tishana's Tidebinder, target Kiki-Jiki, and the activated ability will be countered. For as long as that opponent can deal with this card, Kiki-Jiki will just be a 2/2 creature with no abilities. It's really hard to give examples of how good this ability is in an actual game of Magic, but trust me, it's just crazy and you will always get some insane value out of this. And obviously, if later in the game an opponent is playing a different threat you want to make lose all abilities, you can just blink this creature, make it re-enter, and you can choose a new target to sort of suppress with this card. Archaeomancer, a 4 mana 2/2 creature that whenever it enters the battlefield will return one sorcery or one instant speed spell from your graveyard to your hand. Obviously, in a control deck, just recurring any instant or sorcery spell from our graveyard to our hand and getting a second use out of it is already really fantastic. Especially in this type of deck where we can blink this creature and generate a huge amount of value with it. But in this deck there is one specific interaction that makes this card crazy good. And that is when you combine this card with Cloud Shift. Let's say you have an Archaeomancer on the battlefield and a Cloud Shift in hand. You then cast a Cloud Shift, the Archaeomancer will leave the battlefield, re-enter the battlefield again, the trigger will go on the stack, then Cloud Shift will go to your graveyard, and then you can resolve the Archaeomancer trigger, returning the Cloud Shift from your graveyard to your hand. So basically, for 1 white mana, you can keep blinking your Archaeomancer. In this version of the deck, you can use it to just Cloud Shift during each player's turn, make the Archaeomancer enter, and you will draw 4 cards per turn cycle of Ephara. Solemn Simulacrum, the classic 4 mana 2/2 golem that every commander player knows. Whenever this card enters the battlefield, we get to search our library for any basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, accelerating our mana. And obviously, since we are a blink deck, whenever we blink this creature, we just get to ramp our mana and filter any basic lands out of our deck. On top of that, whenever Solemn Simulacrum would die, if you use him as a blocker or you play your own board wipe and he gets destroyed in the process, you also get to draw a card. So basically replacing itself. Stuntable, a 4 mana clone card that will enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. And it also has flash, meaning we can cast it on instant speed during an opponent's turn to get an extra Ephara trigger. If you compare this to Glasspool Mimic, it also has the benefit that we can use this to copy any creature on the battlefield, not just a creature we control. So you can use this to copy any of your own awesome ETB creatures or even one your opponent's control. So let's say, for example, an opponent just resolved an Atali, a card with a really insane ETB trigger. You can just flash this creature in, copy the Atali, and you will get your own Atali trigger. Or you can just use it to copy any of the other awesome ETB triggers we play ourselves in the deck. And a clone effect like this will always be a really good target to blink because you can just retarget any creature on the battlefield and double up on the ETB triggers. Venser, Shaper Savant, a 4 mana creature with flash. Whenever Venser enters the battlefield, you are allowed to bounce any target spell or permanent. This basically means you can use Venser as some sort of a counter spell, just returning any spell on the stack to its owner's hand. Really great to disrupt any of your opponent's tempo. Or if an opponent has a really huge creature or enchantment on the battlefield, you can also just target that with Venser and bounce it. They will have to recast it by paying the full mana cost again. And the same thing applies to Venser as applies to White Mane Lion and Stonecloaker. You can always use Venser to cast and target himself and just bounce him back to your hand. As long as you have the mana to recast him, you can cast him during each opponent's turn and you will get an Ephara trigger every time he enters, resulting in some really good card draw. Probably one of the more versatile blue cards ever printed. I just really love Venser and the unique ability that he brings to the table. Witch Enchanter, a 4 mana 2/2 creature that whenever it enters the battlefield allows us to destroy up to 1 artifact or enchantment. Just helps us deal with any problematic artifacts or enchantments on the board, and this is once again another fantastic target to start blinking. And if you don't need the creature, you can just play the backside, which is a land that taps for white mana, and you can even make it enter untapped by paying 3 life. I will keep repeating this, there are no downsides to playing any of these MDFC creatures. Lavinia of the 10th. If Ephara is the god of the police, Lavinia is the head commissioner of the police force. It's a 5 mana 4/4 creature with protection from red. And whenever she enters the battlefield, we get to detain all non-land permanents with mana cost 4 or less all our opponents control. Detain is a classic Azorius mechanic, and it basically means that everything that is detained can't attack, block, or use any activated abilities until our next turn. So what Lavinia does whenever she enters the battlefield is basically shut down all small creatures on the board, and she will also shut down all artifacts, including mana rocks. Lavinia is a really underrated card, and detaining is a really strong effect. And some decks are just absolutely shut down by detaining their stuff. For example, a deck that relies on playing treasure tokens and using them for mana, they won't be able to use them anymore until your next turn. And obviously I should mention with Lavinia that this is just an insane blink target. Some decks are just unable to play the game anymore if you can make Lavinia re-enter every single one of your turns. Riptide Gearhulk, a 5 mana 2/5 creature with double strike from the Aether Drift set. If you've never even seen this card or you're not convinced on how strong it actually is, just let me yap about it for 2 straight minutes, and I can promise you after those 2 minutes you will totally be sold on how good this card actually is. Let's start by talking about its enter the battlefield ability. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, you get to choose 1 non-land permanent for each opponent, and they have to put that permanent into their library third from top. Yeah, that's right, not just 1 non-land permanent, but 1 non-land permanent per opponent. So whenever this creature enters, you will actually be able to deal with 3 problematic non-land permanents. And honestly, putting a permanent back into an opponent's library is more annoying than bouncing it or actually removing it, because they won't have access to the card again instantly, and it will ruin one of their future draws. And the best part about this ability is that you can also use it on opponents' commanders. The commander won't go to the graveyard, the commander won't go to the command zone, but they will have to wait 3 more turns until they have access to their commander again, which is absolutely ridiculous. There's nothing they can do about this. And obviously in this type of deck, just blinking this creature is absolutely ridiculous. You will just be putting everything on the board back into your opponent's decks, and they have no way to deal with this. Another really good selling point for this card is the fact that it has double strike and the prowess mechanic. These 2 abilities really are like a match made in heaven, because thanks to the prowess, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this card will get +1/+1 until the end of turn. So every counter spell we play, every mana rock we play, every blink spell we play, this creature will grow in power. Then thanks to the double strike, you can just swing this at one of your opponents and you will deal a huge amount of damage. And you can use its ETB effect to remove any blockers that might stand in the way of this creature. And I'm not done yet talking about this card, because if you look at the mana cost of this card, you see that it has 4 mana pips in it. So you only need 1 more mana pip in cards you control on the battlefield, and this will turn Ephara into a creature. If you still have any doubts about Riptide Gearhulk being a good card after hearing me talk talk about it, please let me know in the comments below. Solitude, a 5 mana 3/2 flash lifelink creature. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, we get to choose one creature an opponent controls, they exile it, and then they gain life equal to the power of that creature, acting in somewhat of a same way as a Swords to Plowshares would. Obviously, having a Swords to Plowshares attached to a creature body with flash is really exceptionally good in this deck, because you can just start blinking this creature and you will be able to spot remove everything your opponents control. On top of that, this card also has the evoke mechanic, meaning instead of paying the mana cost of this creature, we can also exile a white card from our hand and we can cast this creature without paying its mana cost. We will then get the ETB trigger, get a Swords to Plowshares, and then we will get a trigger on the stack that we have to sacrifice this creature, because when you evoke something, it just enters and then gets sacrificed immediately. There are some fun interactions with this creature in the deck. You can evoke this card, make it enter the battlefield, you will then get its removal trigger and its evoke trigger on the stack. First, you let the removal trigger resolve, so you actually get to remove something on the board, and then you respond to the evoke trigger by using something like a Cloud Shift, for example. This creature will leave the battlefield, enter the battlefield again, the evoke trigger will fizzle, so you don't have to sacrifice anything, and you get a new Solitude entering the battlefield, giving you another removal trigger, and this time it won't have to be sacrificed because you didn't evoke the new card that entered. And the last card in this section is Agent of Treachery. It's a 7 mana 2/3 creature that whenever it enters a battlefield allows us to gain control of one permanent on the battlefield. Since we are a control deck, we do need to play some win con cards like this one. If you play this, you can steal anything. You can start stealing lands, you can start stealing huge creatures, you can start stealing enchantments, whatever. You will still keep control of the stolen permanents even if your opponents are able to deal with Agent of Treachery. The main reason why we play this, and that I mentioned that this is a win con for the deck, is if you are able to blink this creature a couple of times, every time you do so, you are able to steal a new permanent. If you can't close out the game because you don't have any win cons of your own, just steal the win cons of your opponents. This will always work and really frustrate opponents. On top of that, it also has a passive ability at the beginning of the end step. If we control 3 or more permanents we don't own, we also get to draw 3 cards. This will barely ever happen in a game, because if you are able to steal 3 key permanents of your opponents, the game is basically over and you would have won already. But I suppose in some games you might get to this point and the 3 cards are a really huge way of card advantage. If you've been enjoying my videos and you really want to support the channel, you can do so through the YouTube membership program. It's really simple. Just hit the join button below the video or click the link in the description below and you get access to a ton of cool stuff. Early access to my deck lists before the videos even go live, access to private chat rooms in the Panzak MTG Discord server, a ton of cool Panzak MTG emojis you can use anywhere on Discord and YouTube, and at the highest tier you can even submit your deck for a review by me. So if you've ever thought, hey, I really like this guy's stuff, hit the join button below. And massive thanks to all the current YouTube members. You guys are the reason this channel exists. Next up, we have the Blink package. As you just saw, we do run a ton of creatures with really strong ETB effects, so we do run a dedicated Blink package to reset all of these effects. Whether it's instant speed spells or just some value engines that allow us to keep on blinking over and over again, these allow us to just get a ton of ETB triggers and just outvalue our opponents. Cloud Shift. Blink cards really don't get any more simple than this. For 1 mana on instant speed, we get to target a creature we control, it leaves the battlefield and then instantly returns to the battlefield. You can use this card during an opponent's turn to just blink a creature, make it re-enter, and you will get an Ephara trigger that way, or you can use it just for 1 mana on instant speed to double up on any ETB trigger. Getting a second use out of Riptide Gearhulk, countering a spell by just blinking your Fear of Impostors, tutoring some other answers with Spellseeker, setting up some repeatable blink with Archaeomancer, or blinking one of your clone spells and just getting a new target cloned. I've never had a single game with this deck where Cloud Shift was a dead card in my hand. You'll always find a use for it. Ephemerate, in my opinion, an even better version of Cloud Shift. Same effect as Cloud Shift, for 1 mana on instant speed you get to blink a creature. But comparing this card to Cloud Shift, this card also has the rebound mechanic, meaning whenever we cast this card from our hand we get to exile it instead. Then at the beginning of our next upkeep we get to cast this spell again again for free, essentially giving us 2 cloud shifts for the price of 1 mana. 1 on instant speed and then 1 again at the beginning of our next upkeep. Getting 2 instant blinks for just the price of 1 mana is absolutely crazy. Fun little fact about the rebound mechanic: if you do decide to cast it for free at the beginning of your next upkeep, it just gets put in your graveyard. It doesn't stay in exile. So the card won't be lost and you can use Archaeomancer or Snapcaster Mage to just get it back. Momentary Blink, another instant speed blink card. This time it does come at the cost of 2 mana, but for the extra mana it does have the flashback ability, meaning when this card is in our graveyard we can just recast it by paying 4 mana. If we do cast it this way, it gets exiled. There were a ton of other 1 mana blink cards we could include in the deck, but I actually prefer paying 1 mana more but getting a second use out of it. Parting Gust, a 2 mana instant speed blink spell that you can also use as a removal spell. We can target any creature on the board, make it leave the battlefield and return to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Like the previous cards, it doesn't blink on instant speed because the creature won't return instantly. It will only return at the beginning of the next end step, making it a little worse than the previous spells, because for example you can't use this card to blink a Fear of Impostors to counter something, because the Fear of Impostors will only return at the beginning of the next end step. This card also has the gift mechanic, meaning whenever we cast this spell we can decide to give an opponent a gift, in this case being a tapped 1/1 fish token. When we do so we get to exile a non-token creature on the board and it won't ever return to the battlefield, functioning as a 2 mana instant speed exile spell. Excellent removal. Eldrazi Displacer, a 3 mana 3/3 creature with an activated ability. For 2 generic mana and 1 colorless mana, we get to exile any creature on the battlefield and then make it return to the battlefield tapped instantly. The 1 colorless mana symbol in the activated mana cost of this creature actually has to be paid with a colorless source. In this deck we do play a couple of lands that generate colorless sources especially for this card, or you can just use the mana from your Soul Ring to pay for this. You can use this card to tap down opponent's creatures because they will leave the battlefield and enter tapped again, so you can clear the board of any blockers. You can use this blink effect to dodge any spot removal spells. If someone is playing a Path to Exile on Ephara, just blinker, make a re-enter again, and the Path to Exile will fizzle. And obviously you can just blink your creatures to just get additional ETB effects, which honestly is really crazy. And once again, with this card you do have a ton of infinite blink combos, but I decided to exclude all of them from the deck. I really don't like playing 2 card infinite combos in my decks. Soul Herder, a 3 mana 1/1 creature that is a blink engine on a stick. Passively, whenever a creature is exiled from the battlefield, this card will get a +1/+1 counter. So whenever you decide to blink anything or anything gets removed by an exile removal spell, this creature will just grow its body. And you'd be surprised over the course of a game how many creatures are actually being exiled, especially in a blink deck. In most games that I played with this deck and that I got Soul Herder on the battlefield, usually it was somewhere between like 7 to 10 counters, a huge creature body your opponents will have to deal with at some point. And at the beginning of our end step, when we have Soul Herder on the battlefield, we can exile a creature we control and then make it return to the battlefield. Just functioning as a blink value engine, we get to use every single one of our turns, so 1 extra ETB trigger every single turn. Honestly, an auto inclusion in any sort of blink deck. I really love Soul Herder. Displacer Kitten, a 4 mana 2/2 creature with a really insane blink ability. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell, we get to exile any non-land permanent we control and then instantly return it to the battlefield. So whenever we cast any mana rocks, any counter spell, we just get to blink 1 of our non-land permanents, which is absolutely crazy. You can even use this card's effect to untap any of your mana rocks and generate you some extra mana, because it doesn't only blink creatures but any non-land permanent. Whenever you have Displacer Kitten on the battlefield and you can set up the Archaeomancer and Cloud Shift loop, every time you recast a Cloud Shift you will get a Displacer Kitten trigger, allowing you to get a huge amount of blinks and a huge amount of value. As I mentioned, not infinite value because we don't play combos, but really a ton of value. And the last card in this section is Tassa Deep Dwelling, another one of the indestructible Taros gods, just like Ephara. For 4 mana we get a 6/5 legendary enchantment indestructible creature, and once again she only turns into a creature if your devotion to blue is 5 or more. Later in the game, if your devotion is high enough, you can just start swinging with Tassa and Ephara, since they are indestructible huge bodies anyways, and you can use them as some sort of a win con. And Tassa basically has the same effect as Soul Herder does. At the beginning of each one of your end steps you get get to exile a creature you control and then returning it to the battlefield. Just a blink engine that allows you to blink one thing every single one of your turns and you will get an additional ETB trigger. On top of that, she also has an activated ability. For 4 mana, you just get to tap another target creature. Perfect way to tap down any blockers your opponents might have. Or if your opponents are about to swing a huge creature at you, just before the declare attacker step, tap down their biggest attackers and you will be fine. Next up, we have the value cards. These cards are our flexible value pieces that didn't fit into any other category. Efficient creatures, token generators, draw engines, and cards that actually allow us to win the game. Archivist of Ogma, 2 mana, 2/2 creature with flash, meaning we can cast this during an opponent's turn to get an extra card of Ephara. And depending on your playgroup, his passive effect is just really crazy. Whenever an opponent searches their library for any reason, you get to gain 1 life and draw a card. If you play in a pot with players that play a ton of fetch lands, just allowing them to search their library for any basic land type and put it into play every time they do so, you will get to draw a card. Which honestly is just some insane value, because some multicolored decks actually do play like 5 fetch lands or something. Whenever anyone plays a tutor, you also get to draw a card of that. Even in more budget-friendly pots where people don't play fetch lands, people will always be playing things like Farseek, Wood Elves, Kodama's Reach, and they will be searching their library for basic lands. Every time they do so, you just get to draw a card of that. The amount of card draw this little 2-drop dude generates you is absolutely insane. Combine this with the amount of cards you get to draw from Ephara and you will honestly never ever run out of cards in your hand. Fairy Mastermind, a 2 mana 2/1 flying flash fairy. And this once again has a passive effect that allows us to draw cards. Whenever an opponent would draw their second card in a turn, we also get to draw a card. So if an opponent plays any card draw spell, be it a Sign in Blood, a Brainstorm, you can just flash in this creature. They drew already 1 card at the beginning of their turn, then they will draw more cards and we will get to draw an additional card of that. And on top of that, this card also has an activated ability for 4 mana that allows every player to draw a card. So if opponents aren't drawing any extra cards to trigger this card's effect, you can just activate this ability. An opponent will get to draw an extra card. It will be their second one in a turn and you will also get another card. If you can activate this ability twice in a single turn for the high cost of 8 mana, every player will get to draw 2 cards, including us, and we will get to draw an additional 3 cards from this effect, since each opponent will have drawn 2 cards in the turn, giving us a total of 5 extra cards for the cost of 8 mana. Luminarch Ascension, 2 mana enchantment that at the beginning of each opponent's end step will check if we lost life this turn. If we didn't, we get to put a quest counter on this enchantment. Then if this card has 4 or more quest counters on it, for the low cost of 2 mana, we can make a 4/4 Flying Angel token on instant speed. Making a 4/4 flying token for 2 mana is already a really good deal. But especially when you have Ephara on the field, if you can make a couple of these tokens during an opponent's turn, you will get to draw a ton of cards of Ephara. And these 4/4 angel tokens also serve as some sort of a win condition in this deck. Just get enough of them and swing them at your opponents and they will win you the game. The fact that you can't lose life to actually get quest counters on this enchantment might be a little bit tricky. You actually have to protect your own life total so you can get enough quest counters on it. If you can drop this as early as turn 2 and your opponents have no creatures to swing at you, you will get this up to 4 quest counters really easily. And later in the game, since we are a control deck, you just need like 1 board wipe with this on the field. Your opponents will have to rebuild their board and you will be able to get a ton of quest counters on this, especially if they don't have any other way to deal damage to you. Abolet Spawn, a 3 mana 2/3 fish with flash and ward 2. Before making this deck, I didn't even knew this card existed, and it's quickly turning into one of my favorite blue cards ever. Passively, as long as this creature is on the battlefield and a creature would enter the battlefield under an opponent's control and that creature has a triggered ETB ability, we get to copy it and choose new targets for the copy. Although the potential on this type of effect is really huge, it didn't win me any games yet. That being said, it has always provided me with some really solid value. An opponent is playing a Solemn Simulacrum turn, we now get to search our library for a basic land. An opponent is playing a Baleful Strix, we now also get to draw a card. An opponent is playing a Coiling Oracle, we now also get to copy that effect. And that's just giving an example with some small creatures. If someone is playing an Etali while you have this on the battlefield, you now get your own Etali trigger. That being said, opponents will play around this effect and no one will drop an Etali when you have this little fishy on the battlefield because they will just be giving you way too much value. As foretold, a 3 mana enchantment. At the beginning of our upkeep, we do get to put a time counter on this enchantment. Then, once each turn, we may pay 0 mana instead of paying the usual cost for any spell we would play, with the total mana cost being less than the amount of time counters on this enchantment. And trust me, in this deck, this card is absolutely crazy. Let's say, for example, you drop this, you pass a few turns, and you have a total of 2 time counters on this. This card does say once per turn, not just once during your own turns. So if you do have a White Mane Lion in your hand and this is at 2 time counters, you can just cast a White Mane Lion for free during your turn, bounce it back, cast it for free during an opponent's turn, bounce it back, cast it for free during the other opponent's turn, bounce it back, and you just can cast it during every player's turn for just paying 0 mana, getting you a ton of Ephara triggers. And we do play a ton more cards we can actually play on instant speed, meaning we can get the full value out of this enchantment by using its awesome effect during each player's turn. And it's not only for creatures, you can even use this to cast counterspell like a cryptic command for free during an opponent's turn if you do have 4 time counters on this enchantment. If this card can't stick on the battlefield for a couple of turns and your opponents don't have a way to deal with it, it will just win you the game. Trust me. Enduring Innocence, a 3 mana 2/2 lifelink enchantment creature from the Duskmourn set. Whenever a creature with power 2 or less would enter the battlefield under our control, we get to draw a card. This effect only triggers once per turn. In this deck, this card basically functions as a second version of Ephara. Since you already saw, most creatures in this deck have lower than 2 power, so they will all trigger this card's effect. They will trigger it during your own turn and during each of your opponent's turns, just doubling up on the card draw that Ephara already gives us whenever we play a small creature during any turn. And like all the enchantment creatures from the Duskmourn cycle, whenever this creature is destroyed, it just returns to the battlefield as an enchantment, so your opponents will have to deal with this card twice. Monastery Mentor, a 3 mana 2/2 creature with prowess. This awesome card has a couple of functions in the deck. First up, whenever we cast any non-creature spell, we will get to create a 1/1 human token with the prowess mechanic. Whenever we have this card on the battlefield, we can just cast any non-creature spell during an opponent's turn, like a counter spell, a removal spell, or whatever, and we will get to generate a 1/1 token. This in turn will give us an Ephara trigger during an opponent's turn and give us some extra card draw. The second function of this card in this deck is just winning us the game. As you can imagine, in this deck, if your opponents have no way to deal with this creature with the amount of non-creature spells we will be casting, we will be generating a huge amount of monk tokens. And these are not just 1/1 tokens, because we can actually buff them up by playing additional non-creature spells, and the prowess triggers will make them grow to huge creature bodies we can actually close out the game with. There's a funny little thing I found out during playtesting. If you do have Archaeomancer and Cloud Shift and you can just keep casting Cloud Shift for like 5, 6, 7, 8 times, you will get to generate a huge amount of these type of tokens, and thanks to the prowess they will grow to huge amounts and you will just be able to lethal someone out of the game with them. Talking about win conditions in this deck, Nadir Kraken, a 3 mana 2/3 Kraken creature that basically feels like it's made for an Ephara deck. Whenever we draw a card, we get the option to pay 1 generic mana. When we do, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature and we get to create a 1/1 blue tentacle token. Let me explain to you why this Kraken and Ephara are like a match made in heaven. Let's say you have Ephara on the field and you play this creature. Then you pass the turn to your first opponent, and since you played the Kraken, you will get an Ephara trigger during their turn and you will get to draw a card. Then the Kraken will give you the option to pay 1 generic mana. Let's say we do so, and we do get to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and we get to create a 1/1 tentacle token during our first opponent's turn. Let's say he then passes the turn to opponent 2. Thanks to us creating the tentacle token, we will get an Ephara trigger, and we do get the option again, thanks to the Kraken, to pay 1 generic mana. When we do so, we get to create another tentacle token. He passes to opponent 3, Ephara trigger, another Kraken trigger. So we get to create a huge amount of Kraken tokens. The Kraken will keep growing in power, and this card basically guarantees us that we can draw 4 cards of Ephara per turn cycle. Hands down, one of the best creatures in the deck. If you do think about building an Ephara deck, doesn't matter what you decide decide on building, like blink, control, stax, whatever, just include the Kraken. Fairy Artisans, a 4 mana 2/2 flyer. And just like the Kraken, this card basically guarantees you that you get to draw 4 cards of Ephara every single turn cycle. And it will even generate you a crazy amount of value in addition to that. As long as this creature is on the battlefield, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, we get to create a copy of that token except it's an artifact. When we do so, we do have to exile all the other tokens generated by this card. Most players will be playing a creature every single one of their turns, and we just get a copy of the ETB effect, an Ephara trigger, and a copy of the creature body. Very awesome and unique card. Keeper of the Accord, another awesome card I just discovered when I was building this deck, and it's a really underrated card in my opinion. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, this creature will check if an opponent controls more creatures than we do. When an opponent does have more creatures, we get to create a 1/1 soldier token. So essentially this ability just ensures you will get a 1/1 creature token every single one of your opponent's turns whenever you're behind on the board. This will give you a huge amount of chum blockers, and this will make sure you get an Ephara trigger every single one of your opponent's turns, drawing you 4 cards per turn cycle. And the second part of the effect, at the beginning of each opponent's end step, this creature will check if that opponent controls more lands than we do. When they do, we get to search our library for a basic plains card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. As I mentioned with the first card in this video, Knight of the White Orchid, we will always be behind on lands against green decks because we have no way to accelerate our mana. So if you didn't start the game or you play against a player that actually plays ramp acceleration, Kodama's Reach, Farseek, whatever, this card will generate you a huge amount of ramp. Keeper of the Accord is a really versatile white creature that I will be including in a ton of decks from now on. Shurikai, Genesis Engine. Another classic Azorius control commander, but we play it in the 99 of this deck because the synergy with Ephara is just crazy. It's a 4 mana 8/8 legendary vehicle, and it has a crew cost of 8, meaning we have to tap a total of 8 power in creatures we control to actually turn this artifact into a creature. But the main reason why we play it is its activated ability. For 1 mana and tapping it, we get to discard a card and then draw 2 cards. In addition to that, we also get to create a 1/1 pilot token that can crew creatures as though its power was 2 higher, meaning it will actually count as a 3 power creature for crewing Shurikai. First part of the ability that allows us to discard and draw 2 cards is already really good card advantage, just allowing us to go through our deck and look for the answers we need. But the main reason why this is good with Ephara is that we can just pay 1 mana and tap this during an opponent's turn, and we get to create a creature token, giving us an easy Ephara trigger and drawing us an additional card. In this deck we also play a ton of board wipes, and Shurikai is just perfect when combined with those, because if you don't crew Shurikai, he won't actually be a creature and he won't be affected by any board wipes, since he will just be an artifact and not a creature. And later in the game, if you have enough pilot tokens, or you can just use any of your other small creatures to crew Shurikai, and you can actually start swinging with an 8/8 creature to close out the game with. Illustrious Wanderglyph, a 5 mana 2/2 creature with the Ascent mechanic. Ascent basically means if we do control 10 or more permanents, we get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. At the beginning of each upkeep, we get to create a 1/1 artifact gnome token. Yeah, each upkeep, not just ours. So every turn cycle, this card will generate you a total of 4 1/1 creature tokens, which then in turn combined with Ephara will guarantee us 4 cards drawn of Ephara. Drawing 4 cards and getting 4 1/1 creatures of Ephara would already be enough to include this card in the deck, but whenever we have the City's Blessing, this card has an additional effect. All other artifact creatures we control do get +2/+2 for as long as we control the City's Blessing, meaning that this card won't just give us 1/1 creature tokens, it will actually give us 3/3 golem creature tokens. And remember, it's each upkeep, so in total per turn cycle we get a total of 12 power and toughness in creature tokens we can actually start swinging with and close out the game with. Elspeth, Sun's Champion, a massive 6 mana planeswalker. Elspeth comes in at a really high 4 starting loyalty, and she has 3 really good abilities for this type of deck. The +1 ability gives us 3 1/1 creature tokens. This will guarantee us getting an Ephara trigger, generating chum blockers for any big creature swinging at us, and later in the game, if you do have enough 1/1s, you can actually swing them at your opponents. The -3, and honestly this is the main reason why we play it, will destroy all creatures on the board with power 4 or greater. As you've seen in this video, all the creatures we play in this deck have really small bodies and they won't be affected by this effect, basically making Elspeth function as a one-sided board wipe most of the time. And the ultimate ability for 7 loyalty will give you an emblem that will give all your creatures +2/2 and flying. Since we are a control deck, we do have a ton of tools to actually protect Elspeth and get to the ultimate emblem. And once you get to the emblem, opponents have no way to actually interact with it. They can't remove it. So for the rest of the game, all your small creatures will be flyers and their bodies will be boosted by 2 power and 2 toughness, making it really easy to close out the game from there. This version of Elspeth really is one of the stronger planeswalkers ever printed, especially for control decks like this one. She does everything right. She protects herself with the tokens, she can wipe the board of huge creatures, and the emblem will win you the game over time. Talking about really expensive white cards that will win you the game, Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite. I probably don't have to explain what this card does because everyone in Magic knows this iconic card. For 7 mana you get a 4/7 Vigilance body with 2 really simple but really brutal passive effects. Other creatures you control will get +2/+2, and all creatures your opponents control will get -2/-2. As you can imagine, this effect is absolutely brutal because in total you will be creating a difference of 4 power and toughness between your creatures and your opponent's creatures. Elesh will make sure your small creatures are buffed and you can actually start swinging with them and close out the game. Whenever Elesh hits the battlefield, she will make sure all the small creatures your opponents control with less than 2 toughness are instantly removed, be it small value creatures, mana dork, some small commanders. And whenever you get into combat with your creatures and you have Elesh on the battlefield, there's no way you can't actually win the trades because there will be a difference of 4 power and toughness. Pyramid Head is a really great win condition in a grindy control deck. And the last card in this section is Sea Gate Restoration. For 7 mana we get a sorcery speed spell that allows us to draw cards equal to the amount of cards in our hand +1. And for the rest of the game we won't have a maximum hand size anymore. Now we don't play this spell for the draw effect. In this deck we already have a ton of ways like Fairy Mastermind, Archivist of Ogma, Ephara itself to draw us a ton of cards. Drawing cards will never be the problem. But the last part of the text on this card is really interesting. We have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. In my experience with this Ephara deck, drawing cards is actually a problem, since you will be drawing this many cards that you will have to discard down to hand size every single turn. If you can just cast a spell later in the game, if you do have the mana for it, you can just keep drawing cards with whatever cards you have for that in the deck and you will never have to discard down to hand size. You will basically have a huge hand of 20 cards filled with answers for anything your opponents are about to do. Paying 7 mana to have no maximum hand size is really bad, but I decided to include it in the deck anyways because you can just play the backside of this card, which is a land that taps for blue mana and you can even make it enter untapped. This card is a nice little extra in the deck, but you don't need it at all. It's just a small little benefit that will make the deck 0.0001% better. Next up, we have the acceleration section. Since we are in Azorius colors, we don't really have access to great ramp or acceleration. This is why we play a ton of mana rocks to get Ephara out as soon as possible and to not fall behind on tempo. These are some pretty regular mana rocks, so I will be going over them pretty fast. Sol Ring, probably one of the most well-known mana rocks and one of the most efficient ones. For 1 mana we get an artifact we can tap to add 2 colorless mana to our mana pool. Especially in a deck like this where our commander has 2 generic mana in its mana cost, this is just a perfect card and it allows us to cast Ephara as early as turn 2. I can guarantee you, if you are able to get Ephara out as early as turn 2 and your opponents have no way to deal with it, the chances of you winning the game are pretty high. Arcane Signet, a 2 mana rock that will tap for either a blue or a white mana. And mana rocks are also really good in this deck since they are non-creature spells and they will trigger all the prowess triggers on the creatures we play in this deck. For that reason we also play an Azorius Signet, a Talisman of Progress and a Thought Vessel. Thought Vessel having the additional benefit of allowing us to have no maximum hand size, so we won't ever have to discard down at the end of our turn. And the last mana rock, and also a card I didn't know before making this deck, is Hourglass of the Lost. It's a 3 mana rock that will tap for 1 white mana. Whenever we do tap this artifact for mana, we also get to put counter on it. Then for tapping it, removing all the time counters on it and exiling this card, it has an absolutely crazy effect. We get to return all non-land permanents with mana value X or less straight from our graveyard to the battlefield. Yeah, you heard me right. All non-land permanents, not just one. I honestly have no idea why I didn't know this card yet, because it's absolutely busted. You can just use this as a really simple mana rock and it will be gaining time counters over time. You don't have to do anything extra for it. Just use it for what it's meant to do, generate mana. Then on a later turn you can just sacrifice it and return everything you've lost over the course of the game straight to the battlefield. As you saw earlier in this video, all the creatures we play in this deck have a really low mana cost. Over the course of the game you will be losing some of these creatures, be it due to your own board wipes, other board wipes, removal, combat, and with an Hourglass of the Lost you can just get all of those creatures back. And as you know, all these creatures have insane ETB abilities which will all trigger whenever they get returned to the battlefield. If there's one thing I appreciate most about creating this deck, it's discovering a card like Hourglass of the Lost. I just really love it and it's really potent. Recently in my Discord server, someone suggested that I should start drawing the commanders that I am doing a video about. So for the entirety of this video, my art piece has been sitting right behind me, right over there. A beautiful hand-drawn version of Ephara, God of the Polis. Yeah, I know, I'm a great artist. I really paid attention to detail and even drew the little guy over here. Now there's one question that's really burning in my mind. What is the mysterious liquid that Ephara is pouring out of her jar? When looking at the color of the juice she is pouring, honestly, in my opinion, it can only be one thing. The Lewis Hamilton Monster Energy. I really think that's the liquid she is pouring over the building. But hey, that's just me. Let me know in the comments below, what liquid do you think Ephara is pouring out of her jar? Maybe it's holy water, maybe it's tears of her enemies. Let me know in the comments below. Next up, we have the interaction and control section. These cards help us shut down the table and prevent our opponents from winning the game. An offer you can't refuse. A 1 mana instant speed counter spell that allows us to counter any non-creature spell. The controller of that spell will get 2 treasure tokens in return. Honestly, countering a game-ending spell like one of the ultimatums for just 1 mana and giving them 2 treasures in return is a really good deal. An offer you can't refuse is probably one of the most efficient counter spells ever printed, thanks to the low mana cost it has. Talking about efficient counter spells that give opponents tokens in return, Swan Song. For just 1 mana we get to counter any enchantment, instant or sorcery spell. The controller of that spell gets a 2/2 flying bird token in return. Countering someone's huge nickel bolas and giving them a 2/2 bird token in return is a really good deal. Change my mind. 3 steps ahead. One of my favorite counterspells we got in the Outlaws of Thunder Junction set. It's a 1 mana card with the spree mechanic, meaning whenever we cast this, we get to choose 1 or more additional costs. For every additional cost we pay, we get an additional effect. If we pay an additional 2 mana, this card functions as a basic counterspell. For 3 mana, we get to counter any spell on the stack. If we pay an additional 3 generic mana, we get to create a token copy of any creature or artifact we control. You have an awesome value creature like Monastery Mentor or an Kraken, you can now just pay 3 generic mana and make a copy out of it, doubling up on the value those creatures already have. And for paying an additional 2 generic mana, we get to draw 2 cards and then discard a card, just allowing us to dig really deep into our deck and giving us some sort of card advantage. Now the best part about these spree cards is that whenever we have access to the mana, we can actually choose multiple of these modes. For example, for a total of 5 mana, you get to pick the first option and the third option, allowing you to counter a spell and then get some card advantage. And you can pick any combination of these abilities you need at the given board state. Spree cards are really versatile cards and will always have a use at some point in the game. Final Showdown, another card with a spree mechanic. For 1 additional mana, all creatures will lose all abilities until the end of turn. If someone is about to go infinite with a Kiki Jiki, you can just play this card, it will lose its ability and you will prevent the combo. If someone is playing a Pugfuros and making 7 gazillion zombie tokens, you can just play this card and it will lose its ability and you won't lose the game. Or if someone just milled their entire library and is about to win with a Laboratory Maniac, you can just cast this card and they will have put their entire deck into the graveyard for nothing because they won't win the game. Perfect way to prevent combos. The second option allows us to pay 1 generic mana and give any creature we control indestructible until the end of turn. A perfect way for if you are playing your own board wipes, or if you see the third option on this card to just prevent any of your value creatures from actually dying to it. And the last option for 5 additional mana functions as a board wipe. And this is honestly the main reason why it is included in the deck, making this card into a 6 mana board wipe on instant speed. Instant speed board wipes will always be really good in this type of deck, since we can just keep our mana open for counter magic, and the synergies between the abilities on this card are just fantastic, honestly. Just option 2 and 3 combined means you can cast a board wipe and make one of your key creatures survive. And as you know, Ephara is indestructible and she won't be affected by any board wipes we play. She will always stay on the battlefield. Swords to Plowshares, a 1 mana instant speed removal spell that allows us to deal with any creature. And it's probably one of the most efficient removal spells ever printed. Cyclonic Rift, the first of 3 game changers I decided to include in this deck. For 2 mana, you get an instant speed spell that allows any non-land permanent you don't control, just allowing you to deal with any problem on the board on instant speed. But the main reason why we play this is because this card has the overload mechanic. For 7 mana, you can overload the spell and you will bounce every non-land permanent you don't control. This effect will just blow out your opponents and reset their entire board. They will have to start rebuilding from 0. And it is a one-sided effect. Everything you have on the board will just stay there and will not be bounced. Usually whenever you can resolve an overloaded Cyclonic Rift, the tempo swing is just that big that you will win the game from there. And since we are a control deck, we are able to stall the game, and getting to 7 mana is not a problem in this deck. Dovin's Veto, a 2 mana counterspell that counters any non-creature spell, and this card itself can't be countered. If you do play in a pot where people are also playing counter magic, Dovin's Veto is just perfect for that. You can use this to counter any of their game wins, and they can't even use their own counter magic to stop this from happening. Mana Drain, a 2 mana card that allows us to counter any spell. And at the beginning of our next main phase, we get to add X colorless mana to our mana pool, X being the converted mana cost of the countered spell. Obviously, just countering any spell on the stack for 2 blue mana is already really good, but the additional effect it has will give you a huge amount of mana. Last night in playtesting, I had the following scenario happen. It was turn 3, I still have all my lands untapped and I have a mana drain in my hand. An opponent was playing Tenek, a 3 mana commander, and they just decided to cast it. I then used the mana drain on it, countering their commander, just ruining their tempo. Then it was my turn again. I played an additional land, I got 3 additional mana from the mana drain, and then I was able to resolve an Elesh Norn as early as turn 4. Yeah, that game was closed out rather quickly. White Sun's Twilight. Whenever we cast this, we get to gain X life and create X 1/1 Fraction Might tokens with Toxic 1. If X was bigger than 5, we get to create those tokens, gain that life, and then we get to destroy all other creatures that are not the Fraction Mights. You will never be casting this card for less than 7 mana. You will always be casting it as a board wipe in this deck. This board wipe is especially good because it will wipe the board. You will still have Ephara left because it is indestructible. You will then get a card draw trigger from the Mights entering from Ephara, and these Might tokens having Toxic 1 might actually be relevant to start swinging at your opponents, and you can win the game with them. If you really don't like this card, you can also play the classic card Wrath of God, which costs way less mana, but I really prefer getting the creature bodies and the Ephara trigger. And since the converted mana cost of this spell is only 2 mana, you can just play a Spell Seeker and use it to tutor up this card. Winds of Abaddon, a 2 mana card that basically functions as a sorcery speed path to exile. We get to exile a creature we don't control, and then the controller of that creature gets to search our library for a basic land card and put it into play tapped. And like Cyclonic Rift, this card also has the overload mechanic for a total of 6 mana. When we cast it for its overload cost, we get to exile any creature on the battlefield we don't control, and all the owners get to search our library for a ton of basic land cards. Now you might think playing an exile based board wipe and ramping your opponents by like a million lands is a bad thing, but trust me, nowadays in modern day Magic, unless someone is playing a monocolored deck, almost no one is playing a huge amount of basic lands. Usually most decks run like 5 of them. And in return for giving them some basic lands, you do get a massive one-sided exile-based board wipe. I honestly really like Winds of Red, and it has the same benefit that the previous card does. The converted mana cost is only 2, so you can use Spellseeker to tutor up this awesome board wipe. Also, fun fact, if you do have an Archivist of Ogma on the battlefield and all your opponents search their libraries for basic lands, you will get to draw a huge amount of cards of it. Fierce Guardianship, the second game changer card we play in this deck. It's a 3 mana instant speed spell that allows us to counter any non-creature spell on the stack. Even if you have to cast this for 3 mana, it's still a pretty good card. But if we control our commander, we can cast this spell without paying its mana cost, making it into a free counter spell. Since this entire deck is built around controlling Ephara and she is an indestructible creature, 99% of the time we will control her and you can just counter any non-creature spell for absolutely free. Honestly, all the cards that cost 0 mana whenever you control your commander should be banned in the format in my opinion. That being said, this card is just way too good not to include in the deck. Sink into Stupor, a 3 mana instant speed spell that allows us to bounce any spell that's still on the stack or any non-land permanent on the battlefield. You can basically use this card as a fencer, just bouncing any spell that's still on the stack, essentially countering it, because the caster of that spell will have to pay the mana again and cast it again. Or you can use this card to deal with any permanent on the battlefield and just bounce it to your opponent's hand. The main reason why this card is included in the deck is because it is an MDFC card. You can just play the backside, it is a land that taps for blue mana and even enters untapped whenever you pay 3 life for it. Life is a resource anyways, people, use it. Unwind, a 3 mana spell that allows us to counter any non-creature spell and then untap up to 3 lands. In my opinion, this is just a free counter spell since you will tap 3 lands to cast this and then you get to untap them instantly. A really efficient way to just ensure you have mana open during an opponent's turn to flash more creatures in or play even more counter magic. Supreme Verdict, the Azorius version of Wrath of God. It's a 4 mana board wipe which is as low as they get, and in addition to that, this spell also can't be countered. So if you do play in a pot where control magic is being played, Supreme Verdict can't ever be stopped. I know we are a creature based deck, but usually all the creatures we play will generate value by entering the battlefield and then getting some sort of trigger, and after that the creature bodies are essentially useless. This is why we play this many board wipes in the deck. We are still a control deck and we do want to control the board, and board wipes are the best way to do so. The longer the game goes on, the better this deck actually gets. Cryptic Command, a 4 mana instant speed spell with 4 different options, and whenever we cast it we get to choose 2 of those. The first option allows us to counter target spell, making Cryptic Command function as a classic counter spell. The second option allows us to return any permanent on the battlefield to its owner's hand. We can use it on any problematic things on the battlefield our opponents control, or even bounce our own ETB creatures. Third option allows us to tap all creatures an opponent controls, allowing us to just swing in with our creatures and deal damage. Or you can even use it in a political way. If someone has a huge board, just step down another opponent's blockers and they will take the other opponent out of the game. And the fourth option allows us to draw a card. And remember, you get to choose 2 of these options. A counter spell that draws you a card, tap down everything, bounce something, bounce, draw, counter, bounce. The options on this card are really endless. Time Wipe, a 5 mana board wipe that does give us an additional benefit for the 1 extra mana in its cost. Whenever we cast this, we get to return a creature to our hand and then destroy all creatures. So before wiping the board, you just bounce back 1 of your valuable ETB creatures. It will be fine, just saved in your hand. You can cast it again to get another ETB trigger and then you will wipe the board. Time Wipe honestly is the best wipe in the entire deck. It would only be better if we could actually cast it on instant speed. And the last card in this section is Austere Command, the white version of Cryptic Command. A 6 mana spell with 4 options and we get to choose 2 of those. Destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, destroy all creatures with mana value 3 or less, or destroy all creatures with mana value 4 or greater. If you choose the last 2 options on this card, this will be a board wipe. In most cases, you will be choosing one of the first 2 options, just removing artifacts or enchantments depending on the board state, and then you will be combining it with the last option, removing all creatures with mana cost 4 or greater. Since in this deck we play a ton of really cheap creatures and they won't be affected by this last effect, essentially turning it into a one-sided board wipe. Honestly, all the command cards are just fantastic cards because they give you a ton of options and versatility. Next up we have the lands. We do play a couple of utility lands, so I'll start by going over those. Castle Ardenvale. This land will enter the battlefield untapped if you do control a plains and it just taps for a white mana. In addition to that, for 4 mana, tapping it you get to create a 1/1 human token. Now this effect is pretty underwhelming, but when you have Ephara on the board, you can use this effect during an opponent's turn to get an extra card drawn of Ephara. Eganjo, Seat of the Empire, a legendary land that enters untapped, taps for a white mana, and it has the channel ability. Channel means that for the channel cost you can discard this card and then use its activated ability. In this case, dealing 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature, functioning as somewhat of a removal spell. And on top of that, the cost of the channel ability, which usually is is 3 mana is reduced by 1 for each legendary creature we control. So when you have Ephara on the board, this card will only cost you 2 mana. There really is no downside to playing the channel lands because whenever you don't use the effect, it just functions as some sort of a basic plains. Field of the Dead, the third and final game changer in this deck. I recently made a video about the newest landfall commander from Edge of Eternity's Tenuk Memorial Ensign, and there I went really in depth on how good Field of the Dead is. Now this is not a landfall deck, but Field of the Dead is still really strong in this type of deck. It's a land that enters the battlefield tapped and you can tap it for 1 colorless mana. Passively, whenever Field of the Dead or any other land enters a battlefield under your control, it will check if you control 7 differently named lands. When you do, you get to generate a 2/2 zombie token. Since we are a control deck and we don't really have that many ways to close out the game, we just play our win cons on our lands. If you play this deck, you aim for the game to go on for a really long time. And later in the game, whenever you start dropping lands and you control 7 differently named ones, which is really easy to do in this deck, you will generate a 2/2 zombie every single time. You can then use these zombies to close out the games or as chum blockers. And obviously the zombies scale really well with effects like Elesh Norn, and whenever they enter the battlefield, they will also give you an Ephara trigger. Field of the Dead honestly is one of my favorite cards ever printed, and it's just insane that you can get a win con on something as simple as a land. Mystic Sanctuary, a land that enters a battlefield tapped unless you control 3 or more islands. We do play a fetch land in this deck, and this card actually has the island typing. So you can use a fetch land to actually go tutor this up from your deck. Whenever you do control 3 islands and this land enters a battlefield untapped, you get to put target sorcery or instant card from your graveyard on the top of your deck, just giving you some recursion later in the game from any of your counter spells or board wipes. Scavenger Grounds, a land that taps for a colorless mana, and for 2 mana, tapping it and sacrificing it, we get to exile all graveyards. Like I mentioned before, nowadays everyone is playing decks that rely on their graveyards, be it a Marin Reanimator, a Necrobloom, a Vivi deck even. Cards like this really help you deal with graveyard decks and might actually win you the game. And since we play Eldrazi Displacer, we actually do need some lands that generate colorless mana to use its ability. Uxa's Cave, another land that taps for colorless mana, and for 3 mana, and sacrificing it, we can search our deck for any land card and put it onto the battlefield. We mainly use this to get another additional colorless source for Eldrazi Displacer, and as a tutor to get our Mystic Sanctuary, or later in the game even our Field of the Dead, so we can start generating zombies and winning the game. Reliquary Tower, another land that taps for colorless, and as I mentioned before, you will really run into the problem of having more than 7 cards in your hand in this deck. If you control a Reliquary Tower and you can fetch it up with an Urza's Cave, for example, you will make sure you will never have to discard down to hand size. Winding Canyons, this land taps for a colorless mana and has an activated ability for 2 colorless mana and tapping it. Until the end of turn, any creature we cast will get flash. So you can use this land during an opponent's turn to give any creature in this deck that doesn't already have flash the ability to be cast on instant speed. You can use this to play a Witch Enchanter on instant speed, removing an artifact or enchantment, flash in a Lavinia during your opponent's turn, using Riptide Gearhulk on instant speed to actually bounce things, or even use it to flash in an Elesh Norn during combat and make it really awkward for your opponents. And for the regular lands, we play a Pain land, a Command Tower, a Deserted Beach, a Fetch land, one of the Verge lands, a Check land, a Shock land, one of the Dual Face lands, a Cycle land, a Filter land, a Nimbus Mage, which is honestly a really weird land but really good in this deck, a Prairie Stream, a Fast land, one of the Bond lands, another Filter land, and for basics, 3 islands and 6 plains. And last up, we have a Considering section. As I mentioned in the intro of this video, I really did spend a ton of time looking at cards for this deck and deciding which ones to include and which ones to exclude. I decided to include 10 cards in the Considering section and actually talk about them and why I didn't include them in the deck. Obviously, there are many more cards I considered for this deck. If you want to see them, just click the link in the description below, go to the Moxfield page, scroll down, hit Considering, and there you will see all the cards I ever considered of putting in the deck. Deep Gnome Terramancer, a 2 mana 2/2 creature with flash. And honestly, he has a really interesting ability. Whenever a land would enter the battlefield under an opponent's control but they didn't play the land, we get to search our deck for a basic plains card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Now this effect is really awesome, especially if your opponents are playing a Crop Rotation, a Scape Shift, a Farseek, a Kodama's Reach, or whatever. But in my opinion, opinion, in a blink deck, a card like Knight of the White Orchid will always generate you more value. Since this card gives you value whenever your opponents cheat in a land, but Knight of the White Orchid will always give you value when blinked. Abhorrent Oculus, a really weird card from the Duskmourn set. For just 3 mana, you get a massive 5/5 flying body, which honestly in itself is already a really good deal. And at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, we get to manifest threat, meaning we get to look at the top 2 cards of our library, put 1 in our graveyard and 1 face down on the battlefield as a 2/2 creature. When you combine this card with Ephara, this basically guarantees us getting a creature every opponent's upkeep and us drawing 4 cards per turn cycle. This card is obviously fantastic in this type of deck, but it does have an additional requirement to casting it. As an additional cost, we have to exile 6 cards from our graveyard. I playtested this card and it felt really underwhelming. It was usually stuck in my hand on turn 3 and I couldn't even cast it because I didn't have enough cards in my graveyard yet. Usually the time I could cast this was like turn 7, 8, 9 and it's way too late for this deck honestly. Ghostly Flicker, a 3 mana spell that allows us to exile 2 creatures we control and then return them to the battlefield. Comparing this to Cloud Shift, instead of just blinking 1 creature, for 3 mana we get to blink 2 creatures. Now as I mentioned, I really decided to go with a control shell for this deck and not a blink shell. Ghostly Flicker is a really awesome card if you want to go really deep into the blink synergies in this deck, and it combines really well with cards like Archaeomancer for example. There are some really easy infinite loops with Ghostly Flicker in a blink type deck, but as I mentioned, I really don't like combos in my deck, so I did decide to exclude it for that reason. Reflector Mage. Whenever this 3 mana creature enters the battlefield, we get to bounce a creature our opponents control. In addition to bouncing a creature on ETB, our opponents also can't cast that creature until our next turn. In some situations, this card might actually be crazy good, especially if you play against some decks that play loops that replay the same card over and over again in a turn. That being said, I replaced it with a card like Aether Channeler, which also bounces a non-land permanent whenever it enters the battlefield, but in addition to that gives us extra options. Grand Arbiter Augustin IV. This is hands down one of the strongest Azorius commanders / cards ever printed. For 4 mana you get a 2/3 creature with 3 passive effects. Blue spells you cast cost 1 mana less, white spells you cast cost 1 mana less, and every spell your opponents cast costs 1 mana more. Obviously in an Azorius deck this is an auto inclusion. Your Ephara will only cost 2 mana, all your other spells will be reduced by 1 to 2 mana, and your opponents will have to pay 1 mana more for every spell they cast. Grand Arbiter is one of the most oppressive cards ever printed and it's banned in my personal playgroup, and that's why I excluded it from the deck. It's also a game changer card and we already played 3 game changers in the deck. Mirror of Life Trapping, a really weird 4 mana artifact. Whenever any creature enters the battlefield, this artifact will exile it. Then all other cards exiled by this card will return to the battlefield. Now how this basically works is you play a creature, you get an ETB trigger, and then the creature gets exiled. If an opponent then also plays a creature or you play another creature, the creature comes back and you will get another ETB trigger. Mirror of Life Trapping just gives us a weird pseudo double up on ETB effects, but it also doubles our opponent's ETB triggers. Let's say someone plays a big Itali, gets a huge trigger, Itali gets exiled, the other opponent plays a creature, Itali comes back, they get another Itali trigger. The value this can generate for opponents is just way too huge. I really don't like the risk of including it in the deck, even though the upside is us doubling up on all our ETB triggers. It's a really weird card that Mishkin pointed out in the Discord server, but I really couldn't include it in the deck, man. I'm sorry, it's just too weird of a card. Restoration Angel, a 4 mana 3/4 creature with flash and flying. I started playing Magic in the original Innistrad block, and Restoration Angel honestly is one of the first cards I really appreciated for its art. Just look at how beautiful it is. That's why I tried to include it in any deck that I built, but it really fell short for this one. Whenever Resto Angel enters the battlefield, we get to pick 1 non-angel creature we control and we can blink it. The ability to flash this in during an opponent's turn, get an Ephara trigger, blink something, get an additional ETB ETB trigger does seem really good on paper, but keeping 4 mana open to do so just isn't that good. I'd play a card like Cloud Shift or Ephemerate over this any day of the week. Salt Skitter, a 4 mana 3/4 worm with a really weird ability. Whenever another creature enters a battlefield, we have to exile this creature and it will return to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. The synergy between this card and Ephara is honestly just crazy. If every opponent is playing a creature during their turn, Salt Skitter will just disappear and re-enter during each of their turns, and this will guarantee you drawing 4 cards of Ephara every single turn. But honestly, in this deck we already have enough ways to consistently get Ephara triggers from, and this card doesn't do anything but blink out and blink in. It doesn't move us forward to actually winning the game. Peregrine Drake, a 5 mana flying creature that whenever it enters a battlefield will untap 5 of your lands. You can basically view Peregrine Drake as some sort of a free creature. You tap 5 lands for it, you play it, you get to untap those 5 lands. And obviously the synergies this card has in a blink deck is absolutely crazy. Whenever you have this on the battlefield, you can just tap 5 lands, play a Cloud Shift, blink the Drake, you will then untap 5 lands and you will net a total of 9 mana. That being said, we don't have many uses for a huge amount of mana in this deck, and I'd rather use Cloud Shift to blink anything else in the deck and get an actual ETB trigger of it. If you look into other Ephara lists, you will see a ton of other decks are running a Peregrine Drake, and that is because it is an easy 2-card infinite combo with Eldrazi Displacer. As I mentioned before, I didn't want to play any 2-card combos in this deck. And the last card I really considered including in the deck is Scourge of Fleets. It's a massive 7 mana 6/6 Kraken creature. Whenever this creature enters a battlefield, we get to bounce any creature our opponents control with toughness less than the amount of islands we control. This effect is obviously really insane since it is a one-sided bounce effect for all creatures on the table your opponents control. Since we are a 2-color deck, it's really hard to get a ton of cards with the island typing onto the battlefield. So usually when I cast this card, I was only able to bounce creatures with like toughness 3 or less. Still a pretty good effect against some decks that rely on having small creatures on the battlefield, but it didn't help me deal with any of the big creatures my opponents controlled. Still a really fun card to include in the deck if you do decide to run more basic lands, especially if you can start blinking this guy. Your opponents will never ever control any creatures anymore, since everything will just keep getting bounced to their hands. And that's it for my in-depth Ephara God of the Polis deck video. The very first true control deck I've ever built, and honestly this has been the most fun I've had playing Magic in a long time. If you want a deck that rewards timing, patience, and clean interaction, this is the deck for you. If you made it this far in the video, comment a vase emoji so I know you're a part of the end game crew of these type of videos. Share this video with your boss, your grandma, and your little nephew. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.